Oh, welcome to Screen Share. I'm John Gargiulo. I'm the co-founder of ReadySet, digital agency focused on creative and media particularly for compliance-heavy companies in healthcare, fintech, et cetera. And that's what we're talking about today. We've got an incredible group for you. Sarah and Shannon are creative strategists, creative strategy leaders at ReadySet, focusing on health and wellness, particularly in Shannon's case, and health and wellness, and also fintech, which is super compliancy in Sarah's case. Sean Buckley is a partner at Dykema, 400-person law firm. Sean has been there, been practicing over a decade, focused on advertising and marketing law. So if you are in growth and you have wondered before, should I really run this ad? Is the thing my lawyer internally is telling me being enforced right now? If you just want to be up to date so you can have a great relationship with your internal lawyer on what is okay and what is not, what is safe to run and what is not, creatively, in terms of tracking, you are in the right place. With that, I want to dive right in. Sean, I want to go to you about the changes that Meta made recently, the announcements. I think they take effect January 6th, that are going to pretty heavily affect anyone doing telehealth, health and wellness, prescription stuff. Maybe you could take it away from there.
Yeah. So, right, Meta, has been embroiled in a few lawsuits, governmental investigations, and has announced new platform rules, related to health, wellness, financial services. Let me share my screen real quick.
Yeah, please do. And from what I understand, this is actually a pretty major deal. This is not a small thing.
It is, right? And as you mentioned, right, goes into effect January 2025. This is going to restrict the sharing of kind of specific mid and lower funnel events. Think certain conversion events, but it's going to affect definitely, some data sharing, here in these industries. So, right, these are lifted straight from Meta's, business terms that have been updated here. So, noting, right, data source categories will have certain restrictions in these areas, right? Health and wellness right at the top, right? Specific health statuses, provider-patient relationships, financial services, unsuitable content, right? That one's not as, new there, but politics is new, right? There's some specific political party and certain topics that they'll restrict: race, religion, sexuality, gender identity, nationality, trade union, and if it is indicative of a personal hardship. A lot of these have been restricted in, targeting and other in various forms across multiple different platforms, but they're taking a hard line stance here, and will almost means prevent you from getting in hot water with yourself.
Do you have a sense, John? I imagine most of these aren't major components of fintech, health and wellness company strategies on Facebook, but a few of them might be 90% of it. I'm looking at those top two.
Yeah.
For example, do you have a sense of like what the real flood of data is that's very used now that might be restricted?
I think there's, we see some advertisers out there in that healthcare space that like to pixel certain conversion events or certain events on their website. Whether, let's say, for example, I'm going to go in and I'm going to go to my, make an appointment for a dental cleaning, right? And you kind of go through that whole process from the web page to actually making the appointment. Well, if you're pixeling further and further into that journey, you can expect to see that Meta's not going to allow you to do that anymore, especially on some of those conversion events. It says, oh, like, we can definitely tell that John went and got his teeth cleaned yesterday, and he has, whatever
Yeah.
it could be.
It's fuzzy for me. Like, no one knows what's going to happen, but it's going to be interesting to see the impact it has. I could look at this list, particularly the top half, and imagine it's going to have a huge impact. And then I could also imagine that they're going to be fine. I'm not sure. I want to talk about sort of the creative side of the things. Shannon, I know you focus on these categories. Talk to us a little bit about creative in particular. That's sort of the information we can get back. How do you approach creative? Maybe you can share some creative and give fodder for a conversation around that side of things.
Yeah, so when it comes to health and wellness right now, a lot of our clients still and different brands still waiting to see really what will come of this. So waiting to see what's going to happen. But in the meantime, have some tactics and different creative strategies that I can share with people today based on what we've seen that has worked with different health and wellness brands. So one of the things that we really want to be mindful of is just not making any claims that we can't back up. So making sure, what does that mean? For example, what would a claim be? Something like, we are the best, we are the fastest, we are the cheapest, really calling out things that if a brand doesn't have proof to be able to back that up, you want to be careful and not use that language. Something that we see, and I'll share my screen in a minute to really give people an idea, a great tactic that we've seen work well for brands is to use people's first person experiences. So being able to have somebody say, this is what I've experienced, whether that is a real customer, which we've seen work well for brands due to the authenticity that real customers can bring across on screen. Sometimes that authenticity can perform better than something that's really lit well and something that an actor may be able to add that extra polish to. But also working with paid actors as well, who can take some messaging from real customers, put it in their own words, and really deliver it so that it is more elevated quality for brands. And we'll see an example of that in a second, where the lighting is good. And we've seen both of those areas drive performance. But really the main thing there being that social proof, being able to have that my personal experience, that is something that can be really helpful here.
Yeah, while you pull that up, I think that if there's one word I've learned in 5 years at Ready Set making ads that performs, it's authenticity. And it's also one of the hardest things to capture. And of course, you can have the well-lit, very informational mid-funnel, here's all these things to know about this product or this, we identify with this problem you're having. But just there's something about seeing somebody where they're genuinely speaking from the heart about something that really comes through. Do you want me to come back to you on the ad, or are you ready for it with it?
Yes, give me 1 second. I will pull that up, just getting that set. But you're right, John. Authenticity is something we've seen time and time again work. And so going to pull up an example right away for you guys here. Okay.
And then once we get this going and take a look at this, Sean, I want to come back to you on the creative side of things, on the claims side of things, kind of what the latest is there. Go ahead, Shannon.
Okay, great. I think the example just went off, so I will get that right back. Bear with me. Okay. Thank you, team.
No worries. We'll come back to you. Sean, when you hear Shannon talk through some of those things, talk to us about the creative side. Again, in our audience here, we have growth folks, creative strategists rather, making ads. What's sort of new? What has the FTC been caring about lately?
Yes, I think one of the new so we got new endorsement guidelines from the FTC that frankly were very extensive, good for compliance because they provided a lot of examples. So in an endorsement realm, when an advertiser represents that an endorser uses or endorses the product, you must have actually used it, right? You can only continue to run that advertisement so long as that endorser remains a bona fide user of that product. And the FTC isn't playing around here, right? So they actually brought an action earlier a few months ago against CarShield and American Auto Shield, where they had creative with paid actors. So it wasn't just hey, you feel better, if they're the ones who are actually using it. There's tons of paid endorsements that are out there. But they went and found and said, no, these actual actors here had not ever used these, and what they stated did not actually represent their.
Does that go filter all down? Most of our advertisers are not using Vivica Fox, but they do have UGC actors saying things.
Yeah.
Does that also map to them?
Absolutely, and they were very specific. So it's not just paid actors. But yeah, your endorsers, your user-generated content, they absolutely have to reflect their honest and truthful opinions.
It sounds so damning for, everyone who makes ads on Facebook. You often have people talking about the product, and maybe they're holding it. Maybe you send it to them, and I'll come back to you on like what defines use. But my understanding of this rule is the way to get around it basically is not to have them make those IMI statements that Shannon said, I've used this and I saved $100. It could be, this product can, save people a lot of money. I heard that this was doing X and Y that made my friend's skin better. But they're not saying I use this product and it did this for me. Where's the line there?
It's, one of the things people hate sometimes is lawyers always say, right, the answer, it depends, right?
Sure.
And it's going to depend on the background, the product, and who the actual individual is who's making that representation. It's going to be different if we have, let's say, a TikTok video of let's say a dermatologist, right? Where we have engaged that dermatologist, and where, the content that dermatologist is saying product X is one of the best acne, cleansers out there, where that's not substantiated by background evidence and scientific reports. That's different than someone who is not a dermatologist, doesn't have that trained formal education, where a consumer may hold them on a higher pedestal.
I see.
And so, right.
What if it's just, I was thinking that like the broadest last thing here, I'll give you an example. The broadest use case. It's a skin cream that's meant to make your face not have so many wrinkles.
Sure.
And somebody's using it and saying, like this Curology, let's name a name. It helps with your pores. They've got dermatologists who recommend it, and say it does X and Y. They're not saying I have found X. They're talking in the third sort of, about the product.
Yeah.
What they hear of it, what it says, what it does. It comes in this great bottle. You know what I mean? Like, is that allowed?
The claims have to be substantiated, right? So I don't care if we're talking about the bottle, right? The FTC likely doesn't care if we're talking about the bottle, how it opens, things like that. But if you are making product-specific claims or performance claims, those do have to be substantiated with that, and you have to be able to provide that evidence if requested.
Got it. I want to come back later on like how, because a lot of people probably listening to this are like, that's most of what I do, and I've never heard from the FTC. So I want to come back on the enforcement piece. But Shannon, go ahead and show this and talk to us about it.
All right, sounds great. So I'll play an ad here. And as you can see, just wanted to note on this ad, you'll see a little note here that says paid actor portrayals. And that's something that really, just to be transparent with audience, we've seen that when brands can include this, it's transparent and it still performs well, even when using a paid actor portrayal. So here's a look at that.
Nurex is my favorite way to get care from a derm expert 100% online. I just took a few photos and uploaded them to the Nurex app. Then I answered some questions about my medical and skin history. Nurex licensed medical providers reviewed my information to come up with an acne treatment plan for my specific skin needs. No in-person appointments needed.
Yeah, so that's really an example of being able to have somebody walk the viewers through the process of how they were able to get access to a lot of health or wellness brands can really offer access online or a more convenient way for people to get treatment rather than waiting months or longer for an appointment. So this is an example of having somebody say, this is my favorite way. Let me walk you through the process. I took an online assessment, a licensed healthcare provider reviewed my information and determined which was right for me. And so laying it out, walking viewers through it, but of course, making it engaging, because on the social platforms, we know that attention spans, sometimes average watch times are just a few seconds. So adding that type of lighting and energy from the actor can really help walk people through. And we've seen these types of ads perform really well from that first person perspective.
I'm glad to hear they perform well, even with those things. I just thought of an idea we could try to do in real time if we have time, but because I was going to go to you, Sean, and get your, is there anything wrong with this ad? And maybe we'll just do it ad hoc as Sarah shows stuff next. you can call out anything to be aware of. But that seems to me something where it says paid actor portrayal. There's this fine print at the end. She has the product in her hand. I assume if you send a product to a UGC creator and they're using it, then they've got it, they're using it. They're not Vivica A. Fox, who's never had her windshield replaced. What do you think when you watch that?
Oh, for sure. And a lot of creators that we do work with, they are using the product. So for example, that talent is somebody who actually is using the product. For example, being able to speak to their personal experience after having the product for some time, being able to use it. So that's something that's helpful.
Sometime or Sean, sometimes they've had it for that day and they shoot the thing. Or what did you think watching that ad?
I think thought the ad was fine, right? So when you are sending a product, right, to a influencer, to someone who you want to post content about it, right? You'll see some compliance issues where either brands or the influencer themselves don't think they have a duty to disclose a material connection because they're not receiving cash compensation, right? Or there wasn't a very specific ask of, hey, I want you to do a review video of this. The FTC will imply if you are sending product to a content creator, there is a implied presumption that you want them to post about it. And thus there's a requirement for them to disclose a material connection, right, to the brand in their post.
I feel like almost no one still does years after they started with that, but we could talk about that. Sarah, I want to go to you on creative. What do you have to share?
Yeah, awesome. Just kind of hopping off of what Shannon, you shared, and Sean, I think there is such a gray area when it comes to, actor portrayals and including, claims within there. You have to really be careful, especially in like the health and wellness space, when it comes to things like real testimonials, real results, showing before and afters. There is such a gray area that a lot of brands try and get around of, implying with a B&A shot that it could be the talent talking about it from their perspective. There are do's and don'ts, and that is, a big one. And Sean, I'm curious to see what you think about incorporating when it comes to real reviews, real testimonials, real before and after shots, navigating that space, especially in, paid advertisements. There are times where we use authority figures, and that could be another gray area of, like you mentioned, using a dermatologist speaking on a product, and the implications or kind of consequences that can come from that being, an actor portrayal or, lines that we may write. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts with navigating that gray area.
Yay, screen sharing.
In this, right, so substantiation requirements apply both to express claims and implied, or claims that are implied based on either placement or whomever is using it. And when you have generally expected performance, you have to have certain disclosures there. So, in this, talk about, right, results not typical. And so you talked about a before and after claim, right? So let's say we have a lady or a man or someone, right? And there's a before shot and then there's an after shot saying, I lost 50 pounds because I took XYZ pill. Well, if you have to disclose that results may not be typical, right? And you have to be very detailed into what that actual disclosure requirement is. Here's a great example here on the from the actual guidelines themselves, right? So if an advertisement simply features before and after pictures, ad is likely to convey an experience that's representative of the consumers that consumers will generally achieve. But if they can't achieve those results, then the ad has to clearly and conspicuously disclose what they can expect to lose in those circumstances, right? Most women who use weight away for 6 months lose at least 15 pounds.
How much does this is helpful? How much does fine print, let's call it in general, help save stuff? You know what I mean? Can you do anything? I'll give you the extreme. Can you do anything you want? Have the person say how it's changed their life and they lost 100 pounds and they got their windshield replaced and saved 90%. As long as you say in fine print, most of this is not true. Like, where's the line?
Yeah. So the FTC has broad powers, right? So under Section 5 of the FTC, it regulates deceptive behavior, right? These are your false ad claims, and there's a pretty high bar that the FTC is going to require with respect to consumers. No, you cannot disclaim away everything, and then you cannot disclaim away compliance, because otherwise, right, we would have everyone would do it. Everything would just be a disclosure, and so even like that, right. So if you have the before and after picture, having a pure disclaimer may not necessarily work. It would also be deceptive to let's say another before and after picture, but you're no longer selling the let's say acne treatment, right? Before picture, right, tons of acne. After picture, completely clear face. Stepping through the results not typical, or whatever the results are typical are. Right. If you're no longer actually selling the formula, or your formula's changed very slightly, right, you're in the next iteration of that. You can't continue using that after picture if that formula is not the same, if you no longer sell that particular product anymore. So, right, that would be, deceptive. You couldn't put that in a disclaimer there, right? That would be just something that.
And these formulas are changing pretty frequently. Okay. So there's definitely things you cannot just disclaim away anything. I think a bigger question that probably people are wondering is, how often do they come down on folks? Like, do you have any examples of lawsuits against, there's like a set of brands that everyone knows and talks about that are spending millions of dollars a month on Facebook ads. Some of them are very aggressive with their claims. I'm sure if we look through their ad libraries, you would find all kinds of issues, but I don't read about, the FTC shutting them down or fining them tens of millions of dollars. So why is that?
The FTC will typically, depending on the nature of the claim and the underlying action, they may allow you to try to resolve it too, right? If it is truly a claim substantiation issue, it also may be resolved in other manners, right? So a competitor may actually file a complaint with the NAD, right, the National Advertising Division, keeps it out of the regulatory. It's almost like a self kind of governing regulatory body, but it does involve claim substantiation. You see a lot here on, right? I always use the beer brands because they're the easiest examples of those, right? Coors Light is the most refreshing beer. Well, that was an actual claim that went up, and I don't remember if it was Coors who made it or if it was Bud who made it, but they challenged that, is this actually, right, the most refreshing beer, or is that puffery, right? We all know puffery in marketing, and that puffery can be a gray area, but at what point does it kind of cross that line? So there's a ton of NAD decisions out there, especially on claim substantiation, on unfair comparisons, that are always, interesting to look at.
I guess so that's interesting to learn. I didn't know about the NAD option. So yeah, anyone who feels their competitor is just making wild claims and gaining share as a result of it, I guess that's something they could do. And what happens? You go to NAD, and then NAD plays arbiter, goes to the other guys and says, you need to quit it?
Exactly. And if you don't, right, so the NAD is part of the Better Business Bureau national programs. And so kind of a self-regulatory board, kind of similar to in digital ad disclosures, right? If you don't have the right certain disclosures in there, and the Digital Advertising Alliance, says, hey, you need to pull these. If you don't, they refer it to the FTC, right? And so it's kind of getting in front of this before a consumer deception claim can happen.
Okay, that's a really interesting option to learn about. I want to go to Sarah and see some more creative, or Shannon, and talk about maybe something in fintech, or just talk about sort of how you guys build these things and have them perform within these constraints. And later, I still want to come back to that, Sean, because I want to understand the worst case scenario. It's like, I think people listening to this could see all of these issues and think, man, this is a minefield, and the bar is high, as you said. And do I need to care? How much do I need to care? what are some real examples of people who have been more than slapped on the wrist by the FTC. But Sarah or Shannon, do you have any other ads you can share with us of sort of how you create within these constraints?
Yeah, I'll share a fintech
Awesome.
ad for Variety here. Let's see if you guys can see my screen.
Hi, quick question. How do you pay for your stuff?
Whoa, go. We'll just play it and then talk about it after.
How do you pay for your stuff?
Mostly cash, sometimes debit, but I wish I had a credit card.
Ah, you're in luck. What if I told you this way you could build your credit and extend your buying power too?
Really? How?
With the secured self Visa credit card, you can build credit as you use it. There's no score required.
What about credit limit?
Cool thing about this card is that you choose your own limit from built-up savings from a credit builder account. It's a lot of spending power in this tiny thing.
That sounds like a game changer. All right, I am gonna hop on self. Thanks, man.
Of course.
So this is an example of, utilizing a more trend-based UGC style ad, still maintaining that messaging without compromising the brand image. You can see here throughout, it is very clear with disclaimers that are needed at certain points when talking about certain products or certain claims that need to be backed through this sort of, these disclosures here. And just navigating this space in general, it is very compliant heavy. Fintech require a lot of upfront work. So, that being said, you work with compliance teams internally. You have to navigate in initial concept review, script review, go through banking partners, and then get ads reviewed again through banking partners. And there's so many layers to this process to make sure it does adhere to, guidelines and, the FDIC here, the FTC. So speaking on that, you do all the upfront work and then it kind of saves you in the end. So you don't have to go through reshoots or, ad rejections, things of that nature.
Do a lot of work and then have to reel it back.
Yeah.
Sean, watching that ad, and Sarah, it just reminds me, fintech is such a minefield. It's like everything, it's an innocent man on the street ad, and everything they're talking about and saying and sharing seems precarious. Same question, Sean, when you watched that, was there anything that stood out to you? Oh, I think maybe on mute, by the way. You're on mute, Sean.
Sorry.
There you are.
Was saying would reserve comments, and I think I was generally fine there, especially in fintech. You just gotta also have to realize what other regulated, what other agencies may regulate you, right? You're not just FTC, right? You also may have other agencies where you have to make the disclosures, and just because you're not, let's say, running an ad in the newspaper doesn't mean that those disclosure requirements don't apply to you. And you still have to figure out, and your compliance team has to figure out a way to make sure that you are accurately still providing those disclosures, regardless of the platform in which you are running on. I mean, that's a challenge for many regulated entities. Say, okay, if we have to make certain disclosures that are required, how does that translate from, let's say, X or from Meta or TikTok, right?
Yeah.
Where it's real easy to throw those at the end on a television screen. Kind of different when you're in TikTok.
Yeah, it's hard to get them all in. It's hard to keep track of what you need to do for what platform, for what agency. A quick tactical question, Sean. Sometimes I'll see an ad and I'm like, that's hilarious. It's like 1.5 point type. Is there a guideline for folks making ads in terms of how big the font size needs to be?
Not necessarily font size, right? If they put a black letter law on this, the answer is yes. And the standard is it has to be clear and conspicuous, right? And
that seems very fuzzy.
They define this, right? They define what clear and conspicuous is in the recent rulemaking action. So it has to be hard to miss and easily comprehensible by ordinary consumers. So what does that mean, right? Because it's not just, oh, well, where was the actual text of it? If you are providing a audio, let's say a radio ad or other, your disclosure has to be through the same medium as what the representation is. Is it a visual? Is it audio? You can no longer speed up, right? Those disclosures have to be in the exact same.
Oh, you're kidding. I remember when I was doing brand ads 20 years ago, they would read them like super speed at the end.
Yeah. How fast can you actually say it? And it was always a joke, right? I remember when I was a kid, I was like, oh, what did they actually say? And trying to figure out what they said. You can't do that anymore because, and so this clear and conspicuous standard, this allows some flexibility for interpretation, right? And so you want to make sure you're within this realm, so much so that you're not going to draw the ire, right, of the FTC here.
Got it. Well, speaking of ire, and then I want to ask you about what people can do to document their processes, to show, proper intent, if that factors in at all. But I really want to, forgive me, dwell on this question of enforcement, because these things can feel academic to heads down growth marketing managers and creative strategists who have never heard of them or a friend of theirs getting dinged. I mean, I've heard of a couple rumored things that happen, but it seems to me, right, you've been doing this a long time, can you name a name of or a case of a company that's running a lot of Facebook ads that got in major trouble, not a slap on the wrist, not, hey, would you guys mind to stop doing that their CEO might have sat down with the growth team and been like, WTF?
Yeah. So, right, just last year, right, so that the FTC warned, there's like 670 companies involved in marketing over-the-counter drugs, right, homeopathic remedies, dietary supplements, foods, that they could incur penalties, right, for failing to back up those product claims, failing to have the appropriate disclosures there. And violations here, when you have violations of rules promulgated by the FTC, right, those are $50,000 per violation.
Is that like per ad creative? If I'm a Facebook manager, is that like per ad creative, you think, or per every time it runs? Or, yeah,
it could be. It could be. Again, it's going to depend, right?
Sure.
That's the statement. But they actually have Federal Trade Commission. If you just search, right, enforcement notice penalties, penalties concerning endorsements, there's an entire page here of every single action that they have brought on notice of penalty, offenses. And you don't see a ton of them. And these were examples that were provided to those almost 700 advertisers here to say, hey, look, you guys need to come into a compliance, on this. And so they will.
When was that? Because it's like the latest one of that list is 1984 on the other page.
Yeah.
In terms of this 700 or 670. Okay, so do you happen to know if they circled back and really hit anybody?
I did not see any that came out of this, right? An actual formal action. That doesn't mean that things didn't come into compliance, right? The Federal Trade Commission, frankly, doesn't want to file a public lawsuit against you unless they really need to. If they need a consent order, right, for, let's say, like BetterHelp, right? When BetterHelp got their hand slapped from the FTC, they were bound, I think, by a 10 or 20-year monitoring degree where the Federal Trade Commission comes in and looks through your stuff every single year, and you have to provide certain reporting on your practices, in that. And in those instances, right, you might need a court action to, and so they'll get a court action because if you violate it, right, you violate the terms of the court order. But they can come knocking on your door and they can threaten a whole lot of things and bring you into compliance without the public ever knowing about it. And that's how a lot of these are actually handled, is they'll say, hey, notice that you guys have a lot of endorsers on TikTok and they are not making any disclosures whatsoever, right? You need to make sure, you are there. And in fact, there's actually, they made very crystal clear in their recent, sorry, let me screen share one more time.
Yeah, please.
In this, it really applies to all areas here, right? The liability, that $50,000 penalty, but the liability of endorsers, right? An advertiser does not get to contract away their responsibility for ensuring that the endorser makes the appropriate disclosures, right? So they will go after and find, everyone in the chain, including the ad agencies who help facilitate these ads. And so, as an advertiser, if you are in compliance, if you are, wanting to ensure the hand doesn't get slapped, you want to make sure that if you're utilizing an agency, that you partner with an agency that has a good compliance program that is vetting influencers, vetting content creators, ensuring that appropriate disclosures are made in best practices. Because frankly, there's a lot of there's some fly-by-night companies out there that are there just to take your money. They'll get you a video out there, but that's almost all they're going to do.
Yeah, there's more of them than ever. It's funny, ReadySet really pivoted hard into super, I don't know a better word for it, compliance-y companies like in fintech and health and wellness about a year ago, and found it sounds so niche, but it's such a huge amount of companies, any kind of serious companies, particularly in those industries, needs to have a partner that cares about this stuff. When I was at Airbnb, I loved our marketing lawyer, by the way. I worked for them all the time. And I think that, and we work with lawyers at our clients. So I think it's important to have that. And you're right, these days more than ever, most folks don't. I wanted to ask you, Shannon or Sarah, again, how this translates to when you sit down to make an ad, how you work with your clients and their legal departments on this. Have you learned anything? Because some people think, oh, geez, if I got to go to the legal department every time, it's going to slow this thing down by weeks. How do you partner with your clients to kind of safely navigate this?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
So just speaking from, the fintech space, very compliant heavy, right? I think part of this process is including compliance, really early on from the get-go, like I mentioned before, but also setting realistic timelines. I think sometimes it can take a while and go back and forth between, bank partners or compliance, and even to get a claim, approved. So there's some flexibility and, adapting timelines if need be, creating a little bit of space within the way that we plan creative to allow for that. So a lot of work up front.
Work up front definitely helps. Shannon, what advice do you have for the client side, like at a brand, the growth marketing person, their legal department, to help everybody win better?
Yeah, I think clear briefs can be super helpful. I know, for example, with lots of different clients, having one clear brief where if there is a claim and that claim is updated, that is then available for the creative team to go in and check on. Also having collaborations, whether that's weekly or bi-weekly with the clients. I know that we do this a lot at ReadySet, and it really helps facilitate that transparent back and forth between client and creative. So if we are pitching something, we can start to align with client on what they are wanting. And one tactic and strategy for this, I can share an ad example that I found. It's not our ad, but just that I found on one of the things that can be helpful is focusing on the feeling in health and wellness, that somebody feels positive once they do receive this service or product, really focusing on that desirable situation. So focusing on that moment, that feeling when you're able to get access to something that for health and wellness, you may have needed to wait a really long time for or jump through a lot of hoops for. So that feeling is something that can be helpful when going back and forth, we've found with clients.
Awesome. Do you want to share it?
Yes, I will share an example that I found that highlights this, and really just some photography to really focus in on what that feeling feels like. For example, I saw this ad and thought, oh, this would be a good example to share. How it feels finally getting affordable mental health care. So really focusing in on this feeling, and we see in the health and wellness space that that's something that can work. So instead of problem solution, really focusing on that outcome, that feeling, really that hope and relief. And we've seen that this can drive performance as well, whether it's changing a virtual background, for example, somebody like sitting in a home space, to changing that background to something that's nature and that's getting some like bird chirp sounds in the background, to really create both audio and visual, that feeling that can be accomplished. We found that when going back and forth with clients in the health and wellness space really like to focus on this desirable situation, that outcome. And so honing in on the feeling, like this example, is something that can be helpful that we've seen.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I'm trying to find this ad that you just reminded me of. Oh, what are they called? It's like a ring. It's like man rings or something like that. Or I can't find it, but I'll just describe it to you. I want to talk about AI. So Sean, this ad uses a platform to have sort of, I call them person staring creepily at the camera, AI person that's based on a real person, but they're lip syncing whatever you want to put words in their mouth, talking about this ring and how it's awesome. And I don't know if they're saying that I used it, but they're saying how great it is, but they're not a real person. What are the guidelines that you advise clients on that kind of thing as it pertains to AI, if any?
Yeah. So our AI endorsers are still endorsers, and still have to have the same rules still apply. Obviously, the AI can't use the product in it, but if it's making actual claims that need substantiated, they still have to be substantiated. There's some interesting kind of case studies out there in it of companies that have used AI endorsers, and it actually some of them have backfired. Some of them have been really well, right? Depending on the brand message and what the brand actually stands for, like the use of that AI person, and I can't recall what the company was, but it actually generated a negative reaction because it said, wait, why is this company using an AI instead of actually paying, someone to have this? And so there's obviously some non-legal considerations that need to go into it as well.
Okay, that you characterize more though on the brand side, the why aren't you paying a real actor side, but legally we should think of AI. There's nothing about the AI-ness itself that needs to be disclosed or anything. Is it more about what they're saying, and you just need to be cognizant that they're the same as a person? I thought some of the platforms do make you say made with AI now, no?
They do. Some of the platforms will require, if you have AI content, it has to be disclosed. Some of them will actually, have systems that will recognize it, and regardless of whatever you do, they're going to put a stamp on it to prevent kind of any potential deception.
I wonder if that recent Coca-Cola ad made with AI, or where it's not completely AI. They just, lots of real people probably spent a lot of money to build it using AI tools. It's so new. I just don't know where the line is. I wanted to ask you.
There's a big an area where FTC is absolutely cracking down on is AI related claims, right? So there's a ton of companies out there that would love to say, hey, built with AI or powered by AI, or this aspect of our service is utilizes AI, when in actuality it doesn't.
It's usually not. Usually people.
The case, they are cracking down.
Good.
Doing that.
I'm glad to hear that. Is there anything companies, marketing folks can do to document what their processes, et cetera, that if they do get that letter from the FTC, they're safer? I don't know. I know documentation can help in a lot of legal situations, just documenting, every time we make an ad, we check with this, we check with that, these people approve it. Is there anything like that, or does that not really help?
No, 100%. And that is some of the best things you can have, is to document your internal processes and to actually have a process, right? And if you have what the actual process is written down, because if there's an issue, one, you need to respond to it and take it seriously quickly, right? Don't throw that into the junk mail pile, right? Don't put it off, right? Talk to your lawyers and say, hey, got this inquiry letter, right? Either from the FTC or from certain states or whatever it is, right? We have a lot of very active AGs, right? State attorney generals that are in enforcement space. But the quicker you respond and the more thoroughly you respond, the better the outcome likely is, right? It's not going to cure the underlying issue, but if they show that you are engaging in good faith, and if you have records that you can demonstrate this as, yes, we had a process of this, here's what this went under, it shows that you weren't just kind of disregarding your duty under the law, or that you just didn't even care about it, right? So
it shows that you're serious. You're not a fly-by-nighter. You actually wrote it down. You did a 1-hour training of new people. It puts you in a different league, I imagine.
And it actually, they took it, they'll sometimes take it into account in this. So let me share my screen one more time. Share here. So, right, so this is the BetterHelp case, and it was from 2023, right? And BetterHelp, right? It was a online mental health platform, and this was more of a data sharing issue, and the representations that this company made to consumers, right? So they said, right, promise to keep your information private, use it for non-advertising purposes, but in actuality, they used the data and your use of the services for retargeting, for lookalike audiences, and optimizing ads. But if you actually go into the complaint, the FTC calls out the marketing manager and faults the company for not providing training to the marketing manager.
Oh, wow.
In this. And it was unfortunately, it was a relatively young girl, I believe, right? She was kind of out there, and this company grew very quickly. She didn't have the training she needed in, compliance and in some of the risk profiles, and some of the things that they found right on their website. They said, this is deceptive, right? What you've done here in holding out yourself to these, using some of these seals that are not authorized, this is deceptive in this. And so they actually ended up having to pay, a few $1 million in that, in addition to the consent decree.
Wow. All right. So document, just, it doesn't have to be fancy. Just write it down, put it in a Google Doc, have a little training. Yeah. And again, another thing that probably most agencies and brands don't do.
And frankly, relatively easy, because being able to pull that out, being able to have a policy, and when, Ken Paxton with the Texas Attorney General's office comes knocking on your door, you can pull out and say, hey, here's what we do. Did we do it in this case? Yes or no. But it shows that you thought about it, that you tried to comply in good faith with whatever it is. That's a lot different than just saying, especially if it's an email saying, no, screw those standards. Let's do whatever they want. See if they'll
we have no idea. Yeah. That's a good example. Sarah or Shannon, how do you, what was I going to ask you? I don't know what to ask you. What are some examples of types of ad formats that get you in trouble? Like, over the years of working for these brands where compliance is an issue, when you see something come back from legal at a company, what gets hit and dinged the most? What kinds of things? What kinds of ads?
Yeah, I think from the get-go, one thing we really try to avoid, as it is another gray area, is the use of, trending audios, trending songs, the TikTok library. So many brands are like mimicking trends, and that comes with a lot of, concerns and violations potentially of, with the FTC and other regulated brands. Can we use a trending audio? Can we create our own form of, this trendy sound, or can we repitch it, or, all these different ways that brands try and get around that. It definitely is a gray area. But outside of some of the classic, before and afters, showing specific results and things like that, just coming from, as AI is ramping up, tapping more into that is definitely a gray area.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And I want to come to you, Sean, in a minute on trending audios and just using those kinds of things, whether they're from a famous song or person or not. Shannon, what else? Can you think of an anecdote where, you all spend a lot of time and effort on something or pitching something and just get spiked?
Yeah, so we've seen with healthcare and wellness pricing. So when you're calling out specific pricing in an ad, that can be rejected by the platforms. And so a strategic way that when discussing with our creative teams and their teams as well internally, that you can still be able to be transparent with pricing without calling out specific pricing numbers is to be able to talk about, for example, for 1, 2, or 3 payments, this is what you get. So being able to get creative with the messaging, and that's something, of course, that clients will be speaking with their legal teams about and then sharing that with us. Like I mentioned earlier, that main brief is a really great place to be able to place this to ensure really seamless collaboration, whether it's the creative team and the internal team as well. And another way to do it is we've seen brands say, like, for less than the cost of my daily latte, I'm able to get this with all of this included. So getting creative with pricing messaging is something that we've seen be rejected when pricing is there, but that creative strategy is something that can be very helpful. And in fact, we can see that pricing and affordability ads can rise to the top a lot of the time in healthcare. And so it's really important to hone down on that messaging so you can't exclude it. You can still have it and get the performance.
Yeah. I'm glad you gave the for less than the price of a latte example, because I'll offer an answer of what brands can do to help get their creatives right. It's the legal folks, the marketing folks, giving agencies, for example, a list of examples of what they're comfortable with, what they can say, what they can't say, because I imagine pricing is a tender ground. Sean, can you speak to that? Like how, again, a marketing manager who's got to crank out 10 new concepts this week should be thinking about how to talk pricing? And then maybe if you could touch on TikTok trending audios that no one knows who screamed this funny way once 2 years ago that everyone's using in their organic or paid ads. Maybe you could speak to those things.
Sure. When we advise our major advertising clients, working with that creative brief, I think as Sarah had mentioned, earlier, it's one of the best places to get compliance and to really outline the do's, don'ts. Do not say this, do not, imply this, providing as you noted, real world examples of this is what we think is good. Sometimes brands are hesitant to maybe provide those to the agency because they don't want creative spillover, or maybe there's like, hey, we really want to see what this agency is going to do without actually influencing, right, the underlying creative, because that agency may take signals from that. But it's still one of the most effective that can be done, but always make sure there's a review process in place too. So you don't want to wake up one morning to a TikTok video on your, FYP page. It's your brand and they're saying something that is absolutely not correct and you didn't know about it. And saying, how the hell did this get cleared? How did this get approved? Who approved this? That shouldn't be a process that comes across a market.
I want to drill into that because you mentioned this earlier. So gifting platforms are becoming quite a thing where they don't charge anything to the advertiser, but they say, send these 100 people in this CSV your $40 product and they will post about it.
Yeah.
If the guy goes, great, here, I had my 3PL send to all those people, and those people go, this thing's amazing, it's changed my life, and they make all these claims. I think you're saying the brand is responsible for those random things people say?
That is a material
kind of terrifying. And you're saying they need to send what if they send a brief that says, don't say that it made all your skin problems go away, and the person glances at the first few lines of the email, gets on, said it made all my skin problems go away.
The advertiser is still responsible, right, for the underlying endorser in it. Obviously, if the advertiser has done its diligence, provided guidance, talked through, exercised a reasonable amount of control, and if something happened, attempted to correct it, attempted to get it removed, and it didn't, right, that's going to be taken into account, right? If you have an endorser that just goes off the rails and goes rogue, right, that's going to be taken into account. but they're probably ruining their own career, right?
I would bet most people don't realize that responsibility is there. And is that paid ads, or even if they just post organically because you sent them a product?
If you have sent them a product, that is a material connection. And the FTC has been very clear about that, because again, you're not doing this out of the goodness of your heart to just send products out. You're sending it to them because you know they're likely to post about it. You haven't paid them, but they're getting a free toaster, they're getting a free vacuum, whatever it might be. There's an implied assumption that you're providing that, they get to keep it, and that they will provide a positive review for you.
That makes sense to me.
Close that material connection.
It makes sense, and it's a bit shocking because I think most people just send stuff out and get hundreds of posts and don't even think about them or watch them sometimes. Sarah or Shannon, unwritten rules of Meta. We've all had ads rejected by Meta. Sometimes they're head scratchers, sometimes they're understood. Do you feel that in these sensitive categories, there are things that you've seen get rejected that you've learned a thing or two about?
For sure, yeah. I'll speak to it, Shannon, then I'll pass you the baton. But just what we've been talking about, I think exaggerated claims, that's a big one. You have to be a little bit softer in the way that you message. If you are building credit, you can't say I built my credit by 50 points. You have to soften the claim and say start building credit. Find ways to not exaggerate these claims, and then avoid like fear-based kind of messaging.
What would be an example of that?
Like pushing too negatively, like you're drowning in credit, it's ruining your life, kind of really more fear-based can be means of rejection.
Why do you think that is? Like, what does it say? I mean, I get it. It sounds kind of gross to have on their platform. Is that why? Or,
And that speaks to more, I think, unrealistic expectations, or framing it in a way that maybe is too narrow targeting on.
I see. If you say it's this huge problem that's scary, maybe it's implicit that it solves that huge problem.
So, avoiding any sort of, exaggerated claims or kind of that fear-based messaging.
Personal hardships. Yeah.
Personal hardships.
Personal hardships. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder too, Sean, if that speaks on like too narrow focused on, targeting people and avoiding discrimination against, if people are very focused in on, maybe an income bracket or something like that, that can breed, issues in that sense as well.
There's part of it, part of these rules, these new platform rules, from Meta, some of this is just some self-regulation, right? If we can back up some of this, right, there's a little bit less of a creepy factor, right? If I, let's say, am behind on my credit cards and I am getting ads about, hey, we know you are behind on your credit cards. That's the creative. It's like, whoa, you can't do that. Like, how do you know that? Right? You definitely don't want your creative to say things like that. It doesn't mean that you can't find an audience out there in a compliant manner and have creative that's compliant, that doesn't, directly associate, that personal hardship with them. Yeah, that's okay. But yeah, you have to watch your creative sometimes on direct claims and that creepiness factor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Shannon, any notices on that?
Yeah, what Sarah was saying about softening the messaging, I think in healthcare and wellness, a big thing that we have conversations with clients about is, even if somebody did have an experience where something was life-changing, we want to soften messaging and ads so that it's, I'm starting to feel like myself again, or I'm starting to feel better, so that it's more inclusive. I know when we look at platform guidelines, making sure that ads specifically in health and wellness are inclusive of a large audience that the brand can tell us about. That's something that with messaging we really watch out for and make sure that that's softened, and going back and forth with client on that can be helpful too.
Like I like the up to, instead of like I lost 50 pounds or save $50, up to $50. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Awesome. Well, thank you, all of you. I hope this was valuable for those watching. We live this every day. I mean, this is what we do at ReadySet. I know this is what Sean does every day at Dykema. So, if you're at a company that cares about compliance and you don't want to get that WTF email from either the FTC or your boss, highly recommend working with an agency, whether it's ReadySet or somebody else that really gets it. I want to let you have the last word, Sean, on what are 3 things off the top of your head that are relatively easy to do that someone watching this call on a marketing team, mostly running Facebook ads, TikTok, et cetera, can go back to their desk, their Slack, and do watch out for going forward?
Yeah, so I think one, disclosures. Make sure that your disclosures and are made in a compliant manner across platforms, right? If your creative and disclosure placement may need to change wherever your platform is, look at your contracts with your marketing partners, right? What are they obligated to do? And are they, helping out there on ensuring compliance and ensuring review? And are they going to bring things to your attention? There's only so many hours in a day, especially for a marketing team out there. And then document your processes, document your compliance issues. You may say, this is never going to get used. And that's hopefully the case, but in the event it's needed, it's going to be an incredibly valuable document.
I think that's really good advice for any brand or agency. Awesome. Thank you all very much. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.